Next state is liquid state. In solid state, we have seen that the particles are very tightly packed. Similarly, the liquid state is differ from solid due to their particle arrangement. How the particles are arranged in a liquid state? The particles are not closely packed. The particles are not closely packed. In the liquid state, we have seen that these particles are tightly packed, so they have a fixed shape. What about liquids? Since the particles are not so closely packed, the liquids do not have a fixed shape. Then what they do? They take the shape of the container in which it holds. What the container is, that is the shape of the liquid. So if I pour 100 ml of water in a beaker, it takes the shape of the beaker. When I pour the same amount of water in a glass, it takes the shape of the glass. If I pour the same amount of water in a bottle, it takes the shape of the bottle. Why so? The particles are not so closely packed. Since the particles are not closely packed, they do not have a fixed shape. They do not have a fixed shape. They take the shape of the container in which they hold. They take the shape of the container in which it holds. Because of the particles are not closely packed. What about their oleum? They have definite oleum. They keep their oleum as such in a solids. Why? The solids, in solids we know that they are tightly packed. Similarly, in liquids also it is not so closely packed, it is loosely packed. That doesn't mean that it is very loosely packed, it is just loosely packed. So similar to solids, the intermolecular force is strong here also, so that the oleum will not change. So shape is changing, but oleum will not change. So we can say that liquids occupy a definite oleum or keep their oleum. What about force of attraction or intermolecular spaces in the solid? Here in a liquid, we know that intermolecular spaces is large compared to the solid. Intermolecular space is large compared to the solid. Since they have a large intermolecular spaces, the force of attraction between the particles is not so strong as solid. So solids, since they are closely packed, they have high force of attraction. Here loosely packed, so the force of attraction is much less than the solid. So the intermolecular force of attraction between the particle is not so strong as solid. So we can say that liquids have a definite oleum but don't have a definite shape. Liquid forms to the shape of its container in which it holds. We know that in a liquid, the force of attraction is not so strong. What about the movement of the particles? Since the interparticle spaces are there, the particles can have the movement, or particles have capacity to move around since the interparticle space is more. So force of attraction is less. What about the motion of the particles? Motion of the particle is higher than the solid. In solids, we have observed that particles vibrate in its own position. But in liquid, since the particles are interparticle space, they have motion or the particles move. The particles move. The particles movement we call them as kinetic energy. The kinetic energy of the particles in the liquid state is more than in the solid states. What about their diffusion property? We already studied that liquids can diffuse any substance. When we add sugar or salt in a liquid, it dissolves very fastly. Why? Since the particles of liquids have enough space, the solid particles can get into this space and thus it diffuses. In liquid, there are interparticle spaces enough so that the solid particles can get into these spaces and thus it diffuses. So the particles in the liquid state can easily diffuse due to interparticle space and lesser interparticle force of attraction. So this helps in the intermixing of liquids or solid and liquids. What about the density? When we compare to solid, liquids are generally light. But the density of the solid is very strong. Why the density of the solid is strong? Since the particles are tightly packed. When we compare to the solid, liquids have lesser density. So we can come to the conclusion that the liquids do not have a fixed shape. Why they do not have a fixed shape? Because the particles are not tightly packed or they are loosely packed. Second property we have discussed is they occupy definite volume. That means liquids have definite volume or keep their volume because of their not so strong arrangement or they are loosely packed. Liquids have fluidity and not rigidity. In solids we have said that solids are rigid in nature because of their tight packed. Here it is not rigid. If it is not rigid, we are call them as fluid in nature. Liquids can flow. What is fluidity? The substance which can flow we call them as fluid. The property of flowing we call them as fluidity. Liquids have fluidity because the interparticle spaces of the liquid particle is not so strong or they are loosely packed and the force of attraction is also less, so it can flow. What about the density? Compared to the solid state, liquids have lesser density. Then what about the movement or kinetic energy? They have more kinetic energy because of the loose packing. Then the last one is liquid can easily diffuse because they have interparticle space so that the substance which we are going to add to the liquid can easily diffuse due to the interparticle spaces in them. So today we are studied about solid state and liquid state. Next class we will discuss about the gaseous state. Okay, thank you.